Like most wars, World War II is often taught in terms of strategies, tactics, and logistics. But just as often, complete coincidences change the fate of a battle and world history. After the deadly December 7, 1941 attack in Pearl Harbor, American authorities searched for any clues to the raid that they might have missed, and they seemingly found some in the most unlikely of places: the New Yorker magazine's advertisements. In the November 22, 1941 issue, there were multiple things that in retrospect seemed weirdly out of place, starting with the cover, which showed a trick-or-treater wearing a Hitler mask. Inside, an ad for a dice game called Deadly Double showed people playing the game in an air raid shelter, even though America wasn't even at war. And a smaller ad for the same game showed dice with the numbers 12 and 7, even though neither of those numbers appear on a standard 6-sided die, along with the word warning and a double cross symbol. Investigators reportedly looked into the ad to see if it was some kind of coded message regarding the bombing, but nothing came of it. In fact, the game's creator, Roger Paul Craig, openly mocked the notion, and even later joined the Office of Strategic Services, the forebearer of the CIA. And it wasn't even the only eerie coincidence on the magazine rack that accidentally predicted the attack. The December 1941 issue of National Comics featured an Uncle Sam cover story called The Bombing of Pearl Harbor. Now that's spooky. If you were a high-ranking Allied military officer who cracked open the Daily Telegraph in spring 1944, you had cause to be concerned. Starting that May, certain answers to the crossword aligned with code names for the upcoming D-Day invasion. Was this a plot that would somehow tip off the Germans? Could the utterly massive military operation be doomed by a crossword? For MI5 agents, the accumulation of hints was hard to ignore. Over the course of multiple issues, the answers to the Daily Telegraph crossword included code names like Utah and Omaha for proposed landing sites, Mulberry, a mobile harbor, Neptune, the seaborne part of the operation, and even Overlord, the code name for the whole operation. Agents finally tracked down crossword setter Leonard Dahl, but instead of being a devious Nazi agent, Dahl was actually a quite surprised teacher. It was eventually decided that the likely cause of the coincidence was that Dahl had unwittingly picked up the words from his students, who in turn heard them from loose-lipped Allied service members stationed nearby. Either way, the crossword puzzle coincidence didn't impact D-Day, and the invasion of mainland Europe proved to be a major success. The Battle of Midway was one of the most important and decisive moments of the entire war. In early June 1942, the confrontation between American and Japanese air and naval forces north of Midway Atoll in the Pacific Ocean was the turning point in the Allies' favor. The Americans lost 1 aircraft carrier, but the Japanese lost 4, as well as more support ships, more planes, and 10 times as many men. Some of that was due in part to superior intelligence, but amazingly, a large part of the success came down to good luck and pure coincidence. The US carriers launched their planes in waves, leading to uncoordinated attacks. Things seemed to get worse when one group got lost and couldn't find the Japanese fleet. But then everything came together, literally. By the time the lost planes found the fleet, they had been delayed long enough to coincidentally show up at the exact same time as 2 other attack groups. As the Japanese fleet maneuvered and shifted positions, the massed American planes also happened to come in at the precise altitude and angle that was perfect for an attack.
Enterprise's dive-bombing squadron plays a hunch and changes course. And in their sights appear the 4 Japanese carriers.
And as an added stroke of luck, the Japanese planes that were supposed to provide defensive cover for the fleets were all drawn away at that exact moment by a 4th American squadron that happened to appear just minutes earlier. It all added up to a crushing victory that turned the tide and effectively gave America control of the Pacific for the rest of the war. Tsutomu Yamaguchi endured one of the most terrible coincidences of the war when he survived the atomic bombings of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was completing a long business trip to Hiroshima when he witnessed the Enola Gay in the skies above Hiroshima. He later said he even saw a small object drop from the plane. Moments later, the bomb detonated. Yamaguchi took cover in a nearby ditch before a shockwave picked him up and deposited him in a patch of potato plants. Badly burned, Yamaguchi made his way through the devastation to the train station, where he boarded a train for his hometown of Nagasaki. Unbelievably, a fevered, bandaged Yamaguchi went into his Nagasaki office for work the morning of August 9th. According to his account, Yamaguchi was trying to explain what happened in Hiroshima to his disbelieving supervisor when an atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Miraculously, this time he was unhurt by the blast, and his wife and child survived as well. Yamaguchi was one of roughly 165 people who survived both atomic bombs, but is the only double survivor officially recognized by the Japanese government. He died of cancer in 2010 at the age of 93.
I have walked and crawled through the bottom of hell. I should be dead, but it was my fate to keep on living.
Jumping out of an airplane is scary even when you aren't being shot at, but for one paratrooper on D-Day, an amazing coincidence calmed his nerves when he discovered his own mother had personally inspected his parachute to make sure it was safe. Sounds impossible? It probably should have been, but on the night of June 5, 1944, Private Robert C. Hillman told a war correspondent on his plane, "I know my chute's okay because my mother checked it. She works in the Pioneer Parachute Company in our town, and her job is giving the final once-over to all chutes they manufacture." And he was right. According to that reporter, Hillman's parachute was actually marked with his mother's initials. It must have helped. Hillman not only survived jumping on D-Day, he made it home from the war and lived a long life before passing away in 1993. In a truly strange coincidence, three major figures from World War II all spent time working as chicken farmers. Juan Pujol Garcia was a graduate of Spain's highly regarded Royal Poultry School who decided to fight Nazis in a truly unique way. He created a fake identity and convinced the Germans that he was a spy. Then once he had created a whole fake spy network to trick the Germans, Britain brought him on board as an actual spy. Garcia ultimately played a key role in spreading disinformation that prevented the Germans from learning about the plans for D-Day.
It was very lucky for the Allies that Juan Pujol appeared when he did. He was the right fantasist at the right time.
Maybe they should have known better, considering that SS leader Heinrich Himmler, the Nazi second-in-command, had once been a failed chicken farmer himself. Himmler was captured by the Allies in 1945 and chewed on a cyanide pill rather than face justice. Another Nazi official, Adolf Eichmann, was also briefly captured by Allied troops. But before he could be prosecuted for helping orchestrate the Holocaust, Eichmann escaped. He then hid out in Germany in plain sight under his assumed identity of, you guessed it, a chicken farmer. He even gloated about selling eggs to British soldiers, writing, "No one was suspicious of the quiet little egg farmer." Eichmann's eggy facade finally cracked in 1960, though, when he was captured by Israeli agents in Argentina. He was put on trial, sentenced to death, and then hanged in 1962. What does a 14th century Central Asian warlord have to do with World War II? If you ask some people, everything. Timur was an undefeated military conqueror whose empire stretched the breadth of Asia. When he died in 1405, he was buried in what is now Uzbekistan in a stunningly grand tomb. Fast forward to 1941. Mikhail Gerasimov was a Soviet archaeologist who specialized in reconstructing the faces of historic figures. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin sent Gerasimov and a team of archaeologists to Uzbekistan with orders to open Timur's tomb. Here's where facts become legends. According to stories, when the Soviets arrived, three mysterious old men stopped them at the entrance to the tomb with a warning that a curse had been placed on Timur's resting place. The Soviets reportedly proceeded anyway, ignoring warnings supposedly carved both inside and outside the tomb. And around June 20th, 1941, Timur's grave was opened and his remains were taken away. Just 2 days later, Germany declared war on the Soviet Union and launched an invasion. Some superstitious folk claim this is proof of the curse, and these tinfoil hat theories don't end there. In November 1942, Timur was finally reburied in his tomb. 5 weeks later, the Soviets defeated Germany at the Battle of Stalingrad, turning the tide of the war on the Eastern Front. That tenuous coincidence is enough for some people to believe that by reburying Timur, the curse had been lifted, despite there being almost no real proof of any of it.
But this place is haunted by a curse that changed the mind of Stalin.
For Germans, November 9th is known as the Day of Destiny due to a number of historical events leading up to World War II that coincidentally happened on that date. It started with the closing days of World War I, as the German Empire crumbled on November 9, 1918, leading to the end of the war 2 days later. Then, with economic and civil strife racking the new German Republic, Adolf Hitler chose November 9, 1923 to lead the small Nazi party in a revolt known as the Bierhallputsch. The Nazis were stopped and Hitler was thrown in jail for 9 months, which pushed him to seek power through quasi-legitimate means instead of open rebellion. Finally, as Chancellor of Germany, Hitler oversaw a wave of anti-Semitic laws that made life all the more difficult for Jewish people in Germany and beyond. This reign of terror escalated dramatically on November 9, 1938, in a wave of state-sponsored violence known as Kristallnacht. Organized mobs of Nazis and Nazi sympathizers destroyed synagogues, Jewish homes, and Jewish-owned businesses. Modern historians estimate between 1,000 and 2,000 Jewish people were killed, and some 30,000 Jewish men were also arrested and forced into concentration camps. Did you ever wonder why the fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't a bigger deal in Germany? Well, it turns out that the wall came down on November 9, 1989. Nobody there wants any celebrations to get twisted. Probably a good call. When Japan struck the US base at Pearl Harbor, Honolulu in December 1941, it was in possession of one of the largest navies in the world. By the end of the war, most of that navy had been destroyed, including two sister ships tied together by name, design, and coincidence: Shokaku and Zuikaku. Their names translate roughly to flying crane and lucky crane, and the lucky part would prove true, because whenever the ships faced battle together, the Zuikaku fared much better. When the Shokaku was damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, it went into port for repairs, while the Zuikaku waited for its twin ship to come back into active duty. This meant that both ships missed the decisive Battle of Midway. The Shokaku was again damaged in November that year and went back for repairs, while the Zuikaku remained relatively unscathed. The Shokaku finally sank in June 1944 in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Zuikaku, in contrast, sustained serious damage but still came out of the engagement intact. The Zuikaku's own demise came in the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. It was hit by the USS Lexington CB-16, coincidentally the successor to a previous carrier of the same name that had been sunk by aircraft launched from the Zuikaku and Shokaku. Finally, there was at least one happy coincidence during the war. As young men, Lee Tolper and Ben Trujillo both joined the US Army and served in the European theater of World War II. The two happened to meet one day when Trujillo noticed Tolper, a radio operator, working by a large antenna. The two had a short conversation before going their separate ways. That should have been it, but fate had a different plan. After the war, both men ended up moving to Denver, and both eventually began working at jewelry stores. One day, Trujillo's boss sent him to buy some parts, and the man behind the counter was none other than Tolper. Recalling their brief meeting on the other side of the world, the two began talking and soon started a friendship that would last more than 70 years until Trujillo's death in 2022 at the age of 96.